Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of TechNode, and as always, I'm joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So Matt, I just got back from Moscow. Never been to Russia before. It's a really interesting place. And it was also interesting because I was invited to attend a technology conference there. And one of the things that I noticed right off the bat is that actually Apple Pay and Apple devices are quite popular there.
So my only experience of Russia has been stopovers in Moscow airport. And I didn't see much Apple Pay there, if I remember correctly. Okay. I was quite excited to see an Alipay sign once. There was one, and that was about it. But my experiences of Russian airports are not the best, shall we say. But awesome. So a technology conference in there, and they invited you along. Were you hosting something, or what were you doing, John?
Yeah, so it was. I gave a speech about about some of the stuff that's happening in China. It was pretty short, like about 5 minutes or so. But it's always fun, I think, to talk to people who don't know much about China and who are encountering the country and the economy and the culture for the first time. So that's always very enjoyable for me. And then I was also on a panel about blockchain. And it's really kind of funny because in Russia they're talking a lot about ICOs right now, and they're also so a lot of the people that I was talking to, they're very concerned about the role of the government. Telegram was just blocked. There are quite a few Russian blockchain companies and ICOs. The volume of ICOs coming from Russia is increasing, and so a lot of people are worried about if something like what happened in China might happen in Russia. So it's really interesting to kind of talk about what blockchain could be without ICOs and without tokens. And personally, I do believe that that there's much more to blockchain than cryptocurrencies and these kind of internal economies that a lot of these companies are building. But yeah, so I was in the airport. The only place that I saw Alipay or anything that wasn't or anything that like any Chinese mobile payment was in the airport, and it was for Alipay at the duty-free store, which kind of makes sense. Apparently, there's a lot of Chinese people go to Russia for tourism, just to go and travel there. There is a visa policy. I think they have like visa-free travel for 2 or 3 days. So quite a few Chinese tourists end up going to Moscow to see the sights.
Yeah, I would guess so. I mean, Russia's does share a border with China, right? I mean, there's up in Heilongjiang, and I'm sure there's tons of Chinese tourists going over there buying vodka in bulk and bringing it back. I don't know what are the apart from vodka, nothing comes to mind in terms of Russian products that Chinese people might want. I don't know, Russian dolls, bread. My knowledge of Russian products that would appeal to mainland Chinese is limited. But okay, awesome. How do we segue this into Liza?
Well, exactly. Well, I was going to do something with mobile payments. So with Alipay, it was really interesting to see. I mean, it just goes to show again just how ubiquitous mobile payment is in China, I think. And of course, that's backed by Alibaba. And one of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit on the last few episodes of the podcast is kind of what's happening between Alibaba and Tencent. And we had the good fortune to have on Liza Lin, technology correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, come on to talk about some of the things that she's seeing. And I think that actually, we talk a little bit about new retail, about mobile payments, but I think the most interesting part of the discussion was the back and forth between you and her, Matt, about, because you're pretty bullish about Tencent and then she's pretty bullish about Alibaba. And so kind of hearing both of your perspectives on this was really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's great to have a debate like that. And I enjoy pushback and people putting forward their different opinions, because we're all learning, and what actually is going on, and who's dominating in these markets, and is actually very opaque sometimes. And so we all kind of, there's a lot of guesswork that goes on. And yeah, Lisa's like super well informed. I mean, she's a fantastic guest for us to have on the podcast, and very intelligent analysis from her. And she's definitely more knowledgeable about Alibaba than either of us. And so it was really great to have her on and provide her analysis of some of the strategic moves they've made, some of their thinking, and the advantages and the sort of direction for their ecosystem moving forward.
Yeah, and it's fascinating for me to see like just how different people's perspectives is, because we had Stefan on a couple weeks ago, and he's coming from, as a consultant, as someone who facilitates, working with Alibaba or working in the new retail space, whereas Liza is coming from the journalist, and so for Stefan, his main motivation is, okay, so what do I need to know to be able to bring value to my customers, whereas Liza, for her, it's what do I need to know to bring value to my readers, and so that kind of approach, I mean, it's going to bring about a different kind of understanding than a different kind of understanding between these two types of people, and so it's always great to be able to have someone on like her, and at the end of the day, or towards the end of the podcast, she actually starts asking us questions. So it's always kind of fun to have someone do that as well.
Definitely. It was a good conversation. So without further ado, let's get into it.
All right. Well, Liza, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure.
So can you just tell us, a little bit about yourself, and also, how you got to be technology correspondent at the Wall Street Journal?
Sure. So when I was growing up, I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. So after college, I started at Bloomberg TV and Bloomberg News in Singapore. And, back then there was this whole BRICS thing, the BRICS country. And I was always curious about this up and coming economy that they call China. So when there was a job opening in Shanghai, I put my hand up for a job. That was in 2010. So I moved in July 2010, and I just rotated through covering several kind of company roles. So I covered the automotive space when I came. I covered the consumer space when I came as well. So the fast-moving consumer goods companies such as Walmart, fast food companies like McDonald's and KFC. And then I took a year off, took a Fulbright scholarship to go to Yale to get my master's. And then I came back, this time with the journal and covering tech. So that's how I got here.
And how long have you been covering technology now?
Covering technology slightly more than a year and a half, I would say. Would be 2 years in October.
Okay, so kind of, as a media worker to a media worker, I'm super curious. Like, what do you love about covering technology in China, and what do you hate about covering technology in China?
So I never thought I would see myself as a technology reporter, to be honest. But I realized that every industry that I covered in the past was being disrupted by technology. Like I used to cover Walmart and, fast food, and that sector is being completely disrupted by e-commerce. And I used to write about cars, so the GMs and the Fords, Volkswagen and your Chinese equivalents. And, I was seeing that sector as well kind of being disrupted. Now you have electric vehicles, you have autonomous driving. So I just felt that technology really is the future, and I had to learn more about it. And, being a journalist, that's one thing you always want to do, right? You want to learn more about how things impact life. What's the social impact? What's the business impact? And I just thought that the time was right for me to cover such a sector, and I just jumped at the chance.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that I love doing what I do is like there's this kind of I have this strange motivation to understand everything, and like to have like my mental, like I want the mental model in my head to be as close to reality as possible. And I think that covering technology, and especially when it comes to all these new trends, these new technologies and new business models, which we're going to talk more about today, I think is a really great way to do that. I remember my first media job. I was working at China Radio International. In my first month in, I was working at a discussion show, helping to write questions for the hosts. And it was just, I mean, I was just blown away by how much I was learning. And after university, you don't get that much chance to learn anymore unless you really kind of go out of your way to do it. And so being a media worker, working as a journalist, I think is a great way to keep doing that.
It was a great way to learn about China as well. Because my family came from southern China many generations ago, but I had very little inkling about what the country was like, how it functioned. So coming over and being a journalist, you get to travel to all these third-tier cities, second-tier cities. The people you meet and you talk to on a daily basis just kind of ranges from like your factory worker in Dongguan to maybe a CEO of a China company, for example. So you do get the whole spectrum of society. And when I think back about the stories I've covered, everything from social unrest to like the rise of China's car market. When I came in 2010, that was when China was starting to displace the US as the world's largest car market. It was such a hot industry at that point. Now it's definitely slowed down. So it's kind of like living in a history book almost. So the lure is definitely there.
You're visiting in lots of different places, speaking to lots of different people. Lisa, you also speak to Alibaba a lot, I believe, as well, right? You cover them quite a lot at the journal.
Indeed, yes. So Alibaba was one of the companies that I focus on.
Right. So, I mean, today, I guess the main focus of the conversation would be around them, and we're going back to a popular topic of new retail, as Jack Ma calls it, or smart retail, as Tencent likes to call it. But you speak to a lot of people at Alibaba, and when you do that, what do you think? What do you sense right now their strategic challenges are, and what's the priority of the organization right now in 2018? Where do their focus lie?
Sure, it's kind of funny how Tencent and Alibaba can never agree on anything, including like what to call this trend.
Yes.
So new retail, the concept was coined by Jack Ma about 2 years ago, and it talks about the convergence of online retail with like the physical brick and mortar stores. So physical retail, as you guys know from living in China, has been impacted quite hard by e-commerce, and particularly by Alibaba. So now what Alibaba wants to do is it's actually kind of offering these brick and mortar stores a way to improve their efficiency in the processes of how they run their operations. And in doing so, Alibaba is kind of offering to help digitize their operations. Imagine using technology to help sell your products better. So one example, I guess, would be mobile payments. That's probably the easiest example. But when you upgrade your payment system to accept mobile payments, then it tracks the purchases that are made in your store, helps you track your inventory. You can manage your customer base, know who your customer is, just all from just digitizing one aspect of your business. And new retail goes way beyond payments. New retail is this grandiose strategy to also help you revolutionize the way you order your inventory. And Alibaba wants to handle your logistics as well. So if you run out of, let's say, a particular product in your store, you can order it on Alibaba and they deliver it to you. So new retail really is about improving efficiency in physical retail.
Does it improving efficiency really represent a massive disruption, or is this more marginal?
Kind of depends on how the existing business was in the first place. So maybe we can talk about how China's offline retail market is right now. And I can focus on grocery, because grocery is one of the areas that Alibaba is definitely looking to disrupt. So in the offline retail space in China, you have a very fragmented retail space. The best example would be, think about the US. In the US, you have chain stores nationwide, mostly in food and beverage and grocery, like Walmart, for example. And Walmart in Texas doesn't differ very much from a Walmart in California. Why is that so? Because the US consumer is very consistent. What it demands in products, what the US consumer demands in products in California is very consistent to what a US consumer in Texas would demand. The Chinese consumer is totally different. the Chinese consumer around China has different tastes and preferences in what they want. So offline retail has kind of developed that way. Your supermarket chains and your hypermarkets are typically local chains. You don't have a nationwide chain to kind of serve or cater to the Chinese consumer. And beyond the local supermarket and hypermarket chains, you have tons of mom and pop stores, right? And mom and pop stores don't have the money or I would say the talent to invest in technology to improve itself. So you have a very, very low tech and fragmented offline retail space. So now Alibaba is kind of offering these mom and pop stores and also your local hypermarket and supermarket chains a way to upgrade.
Right. I agree. It's a very fragmented space. There's a lot of industries like this as well. I mean, I'm more familiar with education in China. That's also a very fragmented space in terms of private education. Does that mean there's a fundamental that perhaps we'll get onto it later, but as we're talking about it now, is a lot of the innovation that's happening in China in the retail space doesn't apply to the States or wouldn't translate over into more developed markets?
So my thoughts on that is that I don't think we've seen a very successful case study of new retail yet. Alibaba's Hema supermarket would be the most successful new retail kind of case study that comes to mind. I don't think these unmanned stores have really actually taken off in China yet. They still have a lot of kinks to kind of work through. And if you think about Hema, what really helped was you had the density you have in Chinese cities. Like Shanghai is so dense, you have so many people living in the same block. You need the density, you need some level of density of a city for the retail model to work out. And I think in the US, you can only think of a couple of cities that are really that dense that could allow the model to take off, which is why I don't that transferable.
Yeah, I mean, so in a previous episode, we talked with Stéphane Monsalier, who works with companies to help kind of transition into this type of space. And one of the I think the theme from that conversation was that a lot of the new retail plays that we're seeing both from Tencent and Alibaba, it's almost what they're doing is a logistics solution. So it's not so much about the retail as it is so much about improving overall logistics and time from warehouse or back room to the customer's hands.
That's right. I totally agree. And beyond Hema, I think a lot of the new retail experiments that you're seeing now are pretty moonshot still. So JD has an unmanned supermarket, which they just started to operate. I haven't looked at it currently or recently to see how well it's doing, but the fact that you still have only so few stores means that it's not. When I think of a successful model, I think of a model that has critical mass and has really taken off. And I just don't see many of these experiments going beyond just experiments, So Alibaba also has this thing they call a magic mirror, in which they put a mirror in the ladies' room, and you could, using virtual reality, try on different lipstick colors and just order from the mirror straight away, have it delivered to you. And that definitely doesn't have critical mass either. So a lot of these are really quite moonshot and still on the experimental stage right now. Even Alibaba's tie-up with the brick-and-mortar chains, or Tencent's tie-up with like Carrefour, and Tencent buying Dalian Wanda's, buying a part of Dalian Wanda's malls, they actually haven't really talked about how they're going to work together strategically beyond small experiments like these. So I think you're right. It really is just a logistics play now, and how to make things just run more efficiently in China.
That brings to mind, I don't know if you guys saw it, Alibaba had this video for this table. I think it was a restaurant table where you could order, the table was just like one big screen, and you can order the food by touching. It was just like a huge, a really, really huge phone screen. You could think of it. Did you guys see that one? It was it was ridiculous. It was like, I was like, are you serious? Are you gonna actually is that implementable in a restaurant at all? It was just the mirror example as well that you've just given there, Lisa. I don't see these things like that. Surely they're just far too expensive and really not very practical to implement right now.
Exactly. So mobile payments, there was a need, and it was just so much of a hassle to be paying with a card or paying with cash. And mobile payments actually kind of solved the friction in the payment process. You have your phone in your hand anyway because you're probably texting someone, so you just pay with your phone. There saves you the trouble of taking your wallet out of your bag, and if you use a card, putting in your PIN number. There actually really was a good legitimate use case to mobile payments, whereas I can't imagine why I would want to use ordering on a table, all the time. Like if you go to a new restaurant, for example, you want to talk to the staff, you want to talk to the waitress, say, "Hey, what are the dishes here that are your speciality?" I just don't want to look at pictures. It kind of reminds me of when Alibaba also had ordering in a restaurant through the app using Alipay, I believe. It just was one of those
Mm.
things where that was, I feel, even more, I guess, unpractical because everybody kind of wanted to discuss what you were ordering, and to look at someone's tiny smartphone just wasn't very practical. Yeah, but same concept.
Well, it's interesting because I mean in my recent experiences in Beijing at least it seems to be the opposite of kind of what I mean, like so basically what I'm seeing is more and more QR codes, and so not so much inside the Alipay, but it's mostly inside of WeChat actually. So there's a few large Chinese chains that I've gone to in the past month or so, that all the ordering is done through a QR code, and then you hear about these unmanned restaurants and things, which does seem quite odd. But I think that looking at the things that I've seen at least from these large chains, that there is this kind of there is this movement towards a digital experience, or a digital system where everything is done through an app, everything is done online somehow, or it's connected to the internet somehow. So I have to. I mean, on the one hand, I think I definitely do agree with you. Like the table and the mirror. I mean, those are just kind of gimmicks, right? And I think that Alibaba is very good at showing off, and I think that those are two very good examples of them showing off without much substance or without much actual strategy behind it. But you look at how customer experiences are evolving, and it is in this the smartphone is playing a much bigger role. I was just at a very large dim sum restaurant a couple weeks ago with my editorial staff, and it was actually kind of cool because everyone could scan the QR code and everyone could order on the same bill at the same time, and so there still was this sense of that we were able to share the ordering experience.
That's great. Yeah, because I remember my first time using that QR code. It was in a restaurant in Shenzhen, and it just happened that the reception there, like the mobile reception, was terrible. So we were trying to scan the QR code, but just because you couldn't get the internet working there, it was kind of it was a useless exercise.
Yeah. It's happened to me before where the signal wasn't very good. Luckily, we were able to get through. But I mean, I do think that there still are quite a few kinks that are going to be worked out. And kind of, and my sense is that with a lot of these things, I mean, maybe I haven't actually been to a Hamas store, so I can't talk about the user experience there. But my sense is that a lot of these kind of O2O new retail things that are being integrated by third parties, so not so much controlled directly by Alibaba, they're not going to be implemented with 100% efficacy. It's there because the people who are in charge of implementing it, they say, okay, well, we don't really need to do this thing, or if this breaks, then we don't really need to worry about it. And so, of course, that does kind of diminish from the overall intended experience. But at the same time, I think that a lot of Chinese people don't really notice that so much. Like, yeah, this is just things don't work in China sometimes, and it's okay.
Actually, that's true. And I guess I was pretty unforgiving on Alibaba earlier. Some of their new retail experiments, I do think, will have legs. For example, I know you've never been to Hema, but going to Hema completely blew me away. Maybe because I'm so used to a terribly run supermarket near my house. But going there, and it's a very clean supermarket. You can pick out the seafood you want, have it cooked and right in front of you for you, so you could have lunch there. The prices generally are quite reasonable for fresh food, which is what a lot of Chinese consumers look out for as well. And to be able to just pick it out, so they track your purchases, so they know what you've bought earlier. And usually what I buy from doesn't vary from week to week. So being able to just choose the same item that I bought last week and just have it sent to me in half an hour, I think that is pretty impressive. I really don't have to think about, after work, going to a supermarket or finding a supermarket or trekking to one when I'm so tired. I just get everything delivered. Hema is one app,
Yeah, totally.
There are others in the space like Meiru Shenxian. They deliver in 2 hours as well. So they have actually really changed the retail experience. And things like, because the Chinese consumer here is so different from any consumer outside in the West or in any other country, it's hard for people who are not from China and looking in to imagine that business models could work out. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, I was in Guangzhou and I went to take a look at what Alibaba calls a car vending machine, which when they initially pitched the idea, I thought it was. I'm trying to find a nice word for it, but I thought it was frankly never going to take off. But, the first day.
Yeah, it sounds like an April Fool's joke when you first when I first saw it. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. That was the word
I was thinking about, but I didn't want to say.
A car vending
machine. So the idea of the car vending machine is you could go on Tmall and you could book a test ride and test drive. Right now, you can only test drive a Ford, but you can test drive a Ford car, a Mustang, or one of their sedans for free if you had a certain Sesame credit score, or for a very low sum of money, you could test drive a car. And the way you do it is you book the test drive online. There's no human interaction at all. You come to the car vending machine, you scan your face, and that's identity recognition, so they know who you are and they know which car you came to collect. And then the car vending machine will slowly lower the car you've picked down to the ground, and you have one guy, just one staffer, that explains to you how the car works, and you just drive it off for 3 days. And it was just one of those concepts you were thinking why would they do this? But when I was there on the first day, it was person after person just came in to pick up their cars. There were 3 Mustangs that were parked outside. By the second hour of its operation, 1 Mustang was driven off already. So it was, then I realized that the Chinese consumer is so used to doing everything on Taobao and Tmall. They buy their home furnishings on it. One guy I spoke to had renovated his place, and he bought everything for his renovation online. It was just that easy. So I think there is something to be said about how comfortable the Chinese consumer is with doing everything online and on their mobile.
Oh, for sure. But in your description there of that particular thing, the vending machine part seems to be almost like a red herring, because it could be just a warehouse of cars, right? I mean, that part doesn't seem to be too important. That the car comes down, it could just be driven out from somewhere else, a more sort of traditional warehouse of cars.
That's right. So I guess this vending machine is probably in John's word, the gimmick here. That's like the headline grabbing thing that attracts Chinese consumers to check out what exactly it is, which is quite smart.
Yeah. Right.
And that's the thing. I think that the reason that companies keep doing that is because these gimmicks work. One of the things that I've been kind of the idea that's been in my head for the last couple of weeks is that this fascination with novelty. Chinese people are always looking for something new to entertain them, something new to try out. And so this idea of a vending machine, or the idea of a table or that you can order on, I mean, it might not do so much in terms of user stickiness, but at the very least, it will bring in new customers. And if you can retain some of those customers, if you can do a good job retaining them, then it's kind of done its job. And then with the card vending machine, I think it's really interesting because So basically, it's a car rental service. Is that right?
Well, not really a rental service in the sense that the end goal is to make you buy the car, but you could definitely see it as, oh, I need a
Okay.
car for 3 days. Why not? I try it out.
Well, but that's the thing. That's the thing. So even when it comes to auto sales, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, so Lisa, you've covered automotives before, but I mean, like purchasing a car in China is notoriously difficult, or it can be quite frustrating. It can take a while to do negotiations, and then you don't know, are you actually getting the best price? There's been reports of price fixing and things like that, and so I think that on the one hand, this might just be a way to de-frictionize, if that's a word, kind of the automobile purchasing decision as well. Make it easier for people to actually buy a car, whereas before it was a pretty big pain point.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Buying a car, be it in China or in the US, for example, is definitely an exercise in frustration because you're always expected to bargain for the price. It's very opaque pricing, no matter where you go. So I do think you're right. This is, at least to me as a consumer, the attraction, not having to deal with like a pushy salesperson.
Exactly.
And if you were test driving, for example, in China, you just test drive around the block. This allows you 3 days of test driving, getting used to the car. So there are definitely pros and cons to the model as well.
So we're talking about all these kind of different gimmicks, but maybe we shift gears and talked about something that's definitely not a gimmick, which is a pretty important change for Ali's strategy, which is the acquisition of Erlenmeyer, and why they did that. That's a lot of money that they put down to do this, and it does seem to link in with the sort of new retail strategy, which is because Erlenmeyer has millions of delivery drivers, and that seems to be what they were purchasing. This army of delivery drivers. So these are how do you analyze this move for them to to acquire the company outright? What are they trying to achieve here with purchasing Erlenmeyer? They were already significant stakeholders before.
Sure. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is this is typical Alibaba investment style. We can definitely talk about the differences between the way Alibaba and Tencent invest, but Alibaba, when they invest in a company, they invest with the mindset of taking the startup kind of under their wing, grooming them for success, just like a mother would with a child. So to do that, they like to be either controlling shareholders or they buy you out. This is what we've seen with Lazada in Southeast Asia and several other, with Alipay as well. So we've definitely seen that. That's the way Alibaba invests. So with Erlenmeyer, you were right to say that they were already a major shareholder. Ali and Ant Financial controlled about 43% of the voting shares before they took over the company. And for me, I think the reason why Alibaba did it was they did see a lot of synergy with Erlenmeyer. And you're right to say that Erlenmeyer has a huge pool of drivers. And these drivers have downtimes, right? Because when do you typically get food delivery? Lunch and dinner. So that leaves the drivers early morning, post-lunch, post-dinner to be delivering a lot of these things. So they could be put to use to deliver Herma groceries, for example. And Erlenmeyer also does supermarket delivery for small items, so kind of like packaged food, beer, nothing fresh, but packaged items. And the supermarket side is the brick and mortar side that Alibaba wants to disrupt and hopefully sell some of its services to. So there's definitely some synergies there. And if you think about the fact that Alibaba also has a Yelp-like app, and it's called Koubei, and has a whole listing of restaurants, and Koubei links directly to Erlenmeyer. So there's a lot of synergies there. And I have not even gone into like mobile payments and how Erlenmeyer as a food delivery app is very high frequency. So that means definitely a lot more payments run through the Alipay platform and they benefit from the data, if anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, so I use Jingdong Daojia quite often, and I also use I usually end up using Baidu Waimai, which just was is now part of Erlenmeyer. But what I've been noticing is that whereas previously it was people branded as these apps, so branded as Jingdong or branded as Baidu. But what I'm noticing more and more is that there are people branded from from different delivery companies. So one good example is Shunfeng. I've been getting food deliveries that I order through Jingdong delivered by people wearing Shunfeng uniforms. On the Baidu app, I've received food from what is it? I am Dada. Branded delivery people, and so thinking about how it's a good way to use downtime. I'm kind of wondering now if that's how these business models began to evolve a little bit. Was this discussion of, hey, we've got these drivers. We want to make sure that they stay drivers, and so that we want to make in order to do that, we have to keep giving them work to do. Well, okay, well let's figure out how what else can we deliver.
Definitely. I think it helps reduce churn if you keep your workers kind of working and earning more. I guess for me, the biggest question is, how smart is this acquisition? I mean, it's really coming at very bad timing, because Didi is now going into the food delivery space. And as we've already seen with the ride hailing and Meituan going into the ride hailing space, Meituan and Didi are offering incentives again, trying to get consumers. And I see the same thing happening in food delivery. Should Didi go into, and they plan to go into 10 cities in the next 1 to 2 months. Should they start going into food delivery too, then we could see, I guess, a replay of the food delivery wars when Ele.me, Baidu Waimai, and Meituan Dianping were just offering incentives to kind of get consumers to use their platform. So, I guess the timing of the acquisition is pretty questionable, because I am sure they would have known that Didi had these plans. And I guess the other to be sure point about having Ele.me drivers is, from what I understand, Ele.me outsources these drivers. So they work with companies who will find a pool of drivers to help deliver it. So the drivers wear like Ele.me jackets and everything else, but they don't actually work for Ele.me. Ele.me kind of outsources this. This I need to double check, but that's to my understanding as of last year. And, it really depends on the customer you want to serve, right? So the good part about the Jingdong logistics side is Jingdong owns its own fleet. They pay slightly better, and the delivery men are just generally more cheerful. For example, the Jingdong delivery man that delivers to my house actually recognizes my husband because he just works the district, and he's always friendly and happy. And that is a sticking point that helps to retain the customers. So I guess for Ele.me, the big question is, if you have your own pool of drivers, could you help to improve their service maybe so that you can, really truly have customer service the way Jingdong does it? Does that make sense?
Right. That makes total sense. I mean, that was my analysis of trying to come up with why they would spend so much money and do this. Like you say now, it's not the best of times. And the main theory that I could come up with is that Jingdong has built up internally their own delivery service, and it's superior, and they can get synergies that Alibaba can't because it's theirs and they completely own it and control it. So Ali thought that they needed to do the same, and the fastest way to do this, rather than building out from zero, was just to acquire and then adapt from Ele.me what they have in terms of their delivery network.
Exactly. So the challenge really comes because, when you have a middleman company kind of taking these drivers on board, then there's also a lot of churn because these middleman companies typically don't pay as well usually, and the drivers are paid per delivery very often. So the churn there is huge as opposed to Jingdong, which has a stable fleet. So that would be one thing to keep in mind when you look at the acquisition.
Right. And then, so going back into the, I really wanted to touch upon the point there about the different investment strategies between Tencent and Alibaba, because I think it's really important, and it's very fascinating that Tencent they also support the Meituan Dianping in this area, and it's a very similar situation. But I don't think we'd ever see Tencent make such a move to acquire Meituan Dianping. One, because they're huge, but more importantly, two, it's just not their style.
Exactly. I
mean, I was listening to a talk from a Tencent executive a week ago in Shanghai. He made the point that for Tencent, they only invest up to 20% in partners. except in gaming. Gaming's the only exception where Tencent will do what more like Alibaba, where they will buy companies outright or take the majority shareholder position in what they consider to be best-in-class companies in the gaming sector. But for nearly all other sectors, they have this sort of like 20% barrier that they put in place where they won't take anything more.
Why are they so reserved?
When they talk about the strategy that they use, they use words like decentralized, platform. Is the word that comes up a lot, and I think it's because that their positioning of their advantage in social and having a platform like WeChat gives them huge traffic, and so they always take the positioning. Okay, we can share this traffic to you online and in a variety of ways, and that's one of their key advantages. I think also that they think it's ultimately, if you let companies grow on top of you or grow with you, then that's actually stronger in the long run, in the very, very long run, to have like an ecosystem of companies that work with you and build services on top of you, rather than acquiring and being sort of more rigid and competing directly. I think is also another strategy or part of the strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of increase the stickiness of WeChat as well, if you can add all these use cases.
Yep. There's only two areas that they see as like really core, I think, which is the other one being online digital entertainment. So in that space, they will move in and start to use their own applications or buy rights from different IP providers and do it themselves in house, and they want to keep that because that will scale. That's online and it will scale. But when it comes to stuff that's offline, I think Tencent knows it's not really their forte. They're not really very good at there's a very big difference between Tencent and Alibaba in company culture. I think Alibaba's very operations driven, whereas Tencent is a product company. At its core, 70% of their employees are engineers. So they consider themselves to be good at building online products that people love, but they're not very good at doing sales and promotion on the ground for stuff. So that's another reason for them to partner up and work through partners rather than acquiring something and trying to do it themselves.
No, I completely agree. I think that's a very smart strategy, actually. So if we just focus on the retail space, for example, Tencent, like you mentioned, they're fundamentally a gaming and social media company. That's their core. They don't have the e-commerce DNA the way Alibaba does or Jingdong does. So what they do is to invest in companies that already have that DNA. So we've seen them invest in like Jingdong, VIP Shop, also Pinduoduo. And Pinduoduo, just because it's not really a household name yet, basically what Pinduoduo does is you can only buy in bulk. You can buy items at a very cheap rate, but you can only buy in bulk. So you need that critical mass to get the price. And Pinduoduo went quite viral precisely because of WeChat. And Tencent recently invested in them.
Yeah, so the last episode was all we talked about for an hour about Pinduoduo. So hopefully our listeners are very familiar with Pinduoduo.
Okay, that's perfect. So I do think like Tencent recognizes its shortcomings in the e-commerce space, yet it also knows that it cannot let Alibaba get too big in the retail space for competitive reasons, of course, like mobile payments and everything else. So what it's doing is trying to offset and diversify by backing friends or players that have the e-commerce know-how and helping them grow to give Alibaba a challenge.
Yes, definitely. Because they're worried about being outflanked. In terms of retail, I think the outflanking would be for mobile payments. That if Ali becomes too strong in this new retail sector, that they might encourage the partners to stop accepting WeChat Pay, which would be a disaster for Tencent.
Exactly. I guess there is something that comes to mind, kind of like a to be sure, before I completely write off Tencent in the e-commerce space. So one thing about Tencent's retail ambitions and its push into like e-commerce, The only thing that makes me feel like we shouldn't brush it off is because Tencent has a huge user base. It has a user base of more than 1 billion users that use its WeChat product pretty much on a monthly or I think it's a daily basis. And if you think about it, if Tencent has found a hit product, it could go viral very quickly with such a huge user base. So that's why I think Alibaba is scared of them, and also, which is why I won't brush Tencent off too quickly when I say they have no chance at all in the e-commerce space.
Yeah, I think Pinduoduo has kind of proved that there is still space to innovate and grow in e-commerce. There is a huge difference between the user bases of key Alibaba products and Tencent products, and Tencent has much wider reach. And especially with the WeChat mini programs, they've set it up so that people can build on the platform, and especially for e-commerce.
Yeah.
So use the WeChat traffic to nurture very large e-commerce business of scale. Yeah.
I do have a question. What do you think of the mini programs? How successful have they been? Not very. It doesn't seem to have taken off around me, at least.
I think definitely they are getting stronger and stronger. More and more people are using them. The Tencent higher management seems to be quite happy, at least in their public statements. It hasn't blown up in the way that people expected at the beginning, but if you look at the statistics, it's quite healthy growth. Yeah, people are using them more and more.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a variety of ways that they get used. So part of that traffic is mini games. Part of that traffic is people, when you share from an app into WeChat or out of WeChat, mini programs works there. So there's all these variety of scenarios that they're used in now, and it's unquestionable that they're gaining more and more traction. The only question is, how much of the traffic will they take away from apps, and how much stickiness will they add to their WeChat ecosystem, and how much will they help to increase WeChat Pay? And all these questions are sort of difficult to measure unless you actually have the data, which only Tencent has. But from knowing, I'm quite deep in the ecosystem of sort of WeChat agencies and WeChat development, third-party developers, and most people are quite happy with this second wave of opportunity that's opened up.
Lisa, are you still there?
There's a lot of WeChat developers now, and they're very busy. There's a lot of work to be done. More and more brands are opening up WeChat mini programs this year.
But I think it's super like this it's super interesting to see how it's almost like the development of Tencent and Alibaba, that almost like opposite sine waves or something like that, where Alibaba got started making a marketplace, so being a platform for merchants. Tencent got started on owning a product experience in the form of QQ, and obviously, I mean, having games and stuff like that. So maybe kind of being a platform there, but and then now Alibaba is moving into owning experiences, whereas Tencent is developing into a platform, with their investment strategies, and their approach to e-commerce in general. Pony Ma said very explicitly that we don't want to do e-commerce. We want to be the platform for e-commerce. And so just to see how these two companies are developing, kind of, I mean, it's like they're going in a spiral, but they're at opposite ends of that spiral of development.
Exactly. No, I'm totally with you. They have very different management styles and very different strategies. Actually, so I did have a follow-up question for Matthew. How formidable a competitor do you think Tencent's mini programs will be to Alibaba, especially in the e-commerce side?
Okay, so e-commerce side, I think we also spoke about this in a little bit before. It's right, most e-commerce on a platform like WeChat is social e-commerce, and that's very different from search e-commerce. So in terms of social e-commerce, it's very powerful, but most of e-commerce is search driven, and so people still have the habit of going into Alibaba platforms to do that because they're the biggest and the oldest and the most stronger user habits. So that's really the challenge for Tencent, is to break into that. And the way to break into that would be to develop actually the habit of people using search more in WeChat, and then building up an ecosystem of e-commerce players within WeChat. So I think that is a pretty good strategy for them, and they are doing it. But it's changing user habits is not going to happen overnight. So I think they're on a clear course, but for them to will it happen overnight? No, definitely not. But I think over a couple of years' time, we could see if they consistently improve the tools they have and guide people's habits into using WeChat search more and being more comfortable buying on WeChat, then yeah, they can start to make a dent. But that's not a very it doesn't lend itself to big headlines or massive moves. I think what they're going for is a more sort of slower, more consistent strategy in changing user habits and getting people to be more comfortable with making payments and buying things on WeChat.
I must admit, I was quite attracted by the idea of Tencent and its 1 billion, user base, and how it could possibly overnight, maybe, or in a very fast time, steal the e-commerce space from Alibaba. But over, I guess, the last 1 year or so, I felt Alibaba just going from strength to strength. And now I think it's Tencent that's really kind of scrambling to kind of catch up. That's kind of
in the areas of e-commerce. Yeah, I agree. Alibaba is definitely super strong, and I don't see that strength being going anywhere. Right? It's the question of how they can. It's all the other areas where they're competing that I think is the interesting part. So I don't see Tencent losing their core of gaming and social, and I don't see Ali losing their core of e-commerce. Those are the bases. They're going nowhere. It's everywhere else where this game is being played.
Yeah, I guess the reason why retail is so sexy as well is because you see a very clear push by Tencent to get into the space, whereas I've not seen, beyond a few small efforts by Alibaba to get into the gaming space, any traction or any big push by Alibaba to get into the core areas that Tencent is in.
Exactly.
Because I think in social they have DingTalk, but DingTalk is really it's kind of made out to be more of an enterprise kind of communication chat messenger. And I haven't seen Alibaba making big pushes, whereas with Tencent, you see them investing left, right, center, and huge sums of money into trying to expand in the retail space. So it's a very clear strategy on that front.
We did see Alipay last year or the year before make some moves to try and move into social. I don't know if you remember that. There was a couple of things that they did. One of them backfired really badly when they got accused of facilitating prostitution at one stage. But there was a couple of things that they did to try and encourage social interaction through Alipay and get people using Alipay as a social tool. And yeah, they all failed. But because social is such a fortress, and I think ultimately when we talk about Alibaba and Tencent and why it's not that one's going to win, one's going to lose, but who could be stronger in the long run. I'm more bullish on Tencent because social is just an impregnable fortress in terms of getting once you have that network effect in place, as Tencent does. It's almost impossible to move in. Same for Facebook outside China. They basically have monopoly, despite what Mark Zuckerberg will tell you. They basically have a monopoly, and that's going nowhere until they get broken up. But if they get broken up, it's probably the only way for them to lose that. But e-commerce is also, Alibaba has very, very strong network effects in that area, and a lot of advantages accrued over time. But it's not as strong as social. So we're able to see Tencent make moves, support partners, and build an e-commerce ecosystem that isn't as strong as what Alibaba is, for sure. But Alibaba's not able to do the same the other way, really, apart from, I think the most successful thing they've done is maybe support Weibo. So Weibo is definitely strong, but it's a different kind of social. Weibo is more of a news feed rather than people communicating. So I mean, when you boil it all down to it, that's the core advantage that Tencent has that is stronger than Alibaba, I think.
So I think I kind of have a contradictory opinion to what you just said. I actually am more bullish on Alibaba than I am on Tencent, simply because the problem with social media is it's very hard to monetize from social media. I can only imagine that if I were looking through my WeChat feed and I were a regular Chinese consumer, there are only X amount of ads I could take before I went really mad and kind of moved from WeChat to a different platform. So I think in terms of WeChat, their monetization of the platform is definitely stalling, or the growth has slowed tremendously because there are only just so many ads you could push to a consumer. And they're kind of reaching the peak of how many people they can get in China. So if they have 1 billion users right now, and China has 1.3 billion people, then your user growth is not going to be as phenomenal as it was before. And that means your monetization from this just slows. You're not going to be able to tap WeChat as a fast growth kind of driver as you did before. Whereas with Alibaba, I feel they are quite smart to be going after the retail space, because a lot of what Alibaba is doing in online and offline retail, a lot of what they're doing is selling services, trying to sell ads to merchants who sell on their online platform. And for the offline retail, when you use logistics from Alibaba, you use their payment services, they all make money from that. And retail in China is a huge untapped market. And we all know the Chinese consumer is just going to go from strength to strength. As incomes rise, China moves up the value chain, becomes a higher income country. So I actually am much more bullish on Alibaba than I am on Tencent. And I think Tencent knows that retail has to be an area they need to tap precisely for these reasons. And that's why they're going in so strongly on it. Because with Alibaba, they've only tried organic expansion into Tencent's core areas of social media and gaming, whereas with Tencent, they're definitely doing inorganic expansion into these areas beyond just trying to grow their own internal e-commerce app, if that makes sense.
Sure. That makes sense. I mean, what you said about the user numbers on WeChat stalling, definitely that's true. It's not going to go anywhere, but I think Tencent has known that for years. The user numbers in terms of user growth have been steadily declining for about 3 years now. So that's not anything that's a new development. It's just got to a point where it really is stalling down to 1 or 2% in that region. In terms of how Tencent monetizes ads, they still have a lot of room to grow. I mean, in terms of the newsfeed, you compare the number of advertisements on the newsfeed on WeChat to any other newsfeed in China, and it's just like night and day. On WeChat newsfeed, it's about 1 or 2. It's up to 2 adverts per day now. If you open up Toutiao or Weibo, it's I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but I would say it's in double figures per day. So there's a ton of room to grow there. Actually, they've been very conservative on advertisement growth on WeChat, but actually because of the way that they break down their financials, it's not actually very clear where they make the majority of their revenue on advertisement. And I actually believe that most analysts, investors are misled in believing that WeChat's more important than it is. I think a lot of their advertisement revenue is coming from other sources that aren't talked about that much. Things like Tencent Video, for example, where you get a lot of adverts on there. And they've got a whole myriad of apps and products in different areas, which many of which do have advertisement that people don't talk about. But I'm sure all of that money adds up and contributes perhaps even more than WeChat does. But due to the way they do their financials, it's very opaque. It's all kind of guesswork as to how that segment works for Tencent. With regard to retail, you make some good points. Retail has got a long way to go in China. You can be very bullish on that. I think Tencent's in some very interesting areas like entertainment. Online spending on online entertainment. Video is a good example. things like esports, or traditional sporting rights, anything in the entertainment sector. Tencent's pretty strong, and spending on that's going to grow and grow as well, in a similar way that retail will. So there's considerable upside still on a lot of what they've invested in and where they're strong.
Playing devil's advocate here, Alibaba has Youku, Tudou, right? So anything Tencent could get in terms of ads for digital entertainment, Alibaba could probably also kind of counter.
Similarly, I think Tencent Video is in a stronger position than Youku Tudou. It has more market share, it has more paid subscribers, right? Considerably more. I think number 2 is iQIYI, right? And then Youku Tudou would be number 3.
That's true.
But they're all like investing in. They all go into each other's markets. I think every market we look at that opens up, they are investing, so they're supporting one of the players in there. And I think recently, was it last year, Pony Ma made a comment that he's really quite fatigued about it, that they have to continually invest. Why do we need to compete in all these markets? We're competing for the sake of competing sometimes. But it's the sort of one of the metaphors that Alibaba, Zhou's Hai, used was that it's it's like a game of Go. So they're placing their pieces, not so much a game of chess, but more of a game of Go strategy where you're trying to encircle people. So if they're worried that, I think Ali would be worried that if Tencent gets too strong in one area, then they could use that to outflank them somewhere else. And the retail is actually a very good example of this, because if Ali gets too strong in retail, as we mentioned before, that could threaten the payments aspect, particularly for Tencent. So I think that's definitely a part of why Tencent's moving in.
Oh yeah, so I was just the metaphor of Go I've heard crop up a lot recently, and I think that it's actually it's really it's a great metaphor. Actually, I'm not sure if you guys have actually played the game. I've been playing since university, and I'm actually teaching my son to play right now. And it's fascinating because the game, as Matt, as you said, it's about encircling and in making sure that you're not outflanked. But then also setting up for eventual conflict. So the beginning of a game, it's a completely blank board, and there are best practices and kind of accepted strategies about how to go about building up your base of strength. But at the end of the day, like if you watch like professional Go players, the moves that they make, they don't make logical sense or linear sense. But really what it is, it's about placing pieces strategically, looking forward towards the end game and saying, okay, if I put a piece here, then if I have to later, I can project power over here. Or if I put a piece here that's maybe a few spaces away from a stone that I place somewhere else, well then I can support that stone later on if I have to. And so kind of that way of thinking, and I've heard this metaphor many times recently. It really does have me thinking, like, how much the games we play influence our psychology, and in particular when we're looking at business strategy. I think that geopolitically, it's a very similar game that China is playing, and looking at kind of how internet companies they go about their strategy and kind of their planning. They are very concerned about being disrupted, and I think that Go again is a really great metaphor.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, in reality, these companies have no choice but to acquire stakes in other startups as well, because acquiring users in China's internet space is now getting more and more expensive. So it's not like an app like Alipay could grow organically as cheaply and as easily as before. So by, for example, acquiring Ele.me, you have a huge base of Ele.me users that you could easily convert into Alipay users. If you let's say put Alipay as your preferred payment, and maybe WeChat Pay much lower. So I think a lot of these moves are also to acquire users, new users, and bring them into their ecosystem, be it Alibaba or Tencent, acquiring them in like a cheap way and in a huge way.
Yes, yeah, I've heard similar things from Tencent executives describing that. I think one of them said, I was put into a presentation recently, and it was thing. Basically, once you've got traffic, once you've got huge traffic, you can monetize that in different ways. And actually, it's sometimes in unexpected ways you didn't at the time think was possible. So I totally agree with you. Your point. If you get this massive user base, there's different things you can do with it, and traffic in China is more monetizable than it is outside. I think the companies have learned how to do it in a couple of different ways.
Well, Liza, thank you so much again for taking the time to join us. I think it was a great conversation. I think we weaved in and out of kind of new retail and Alibaba, but I think it was a great discussion, kind of looking at some bigger picture issues, especially between Tencent and Alibaba.
Thanks for having me on. It was really my pleasure. I agree. I think I learned as much from Matthew and you as I did from my regular work. So definitely, it was a good discussion and very pertinent topics.
Great. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you took the time to leave us a review on iTunes. If you're on Overcast or Pocket Cast, you can tap on that star button, and it will share this episode to your network. Liza, before we go, if our audience wants to get in touch with you, how should they do that?
You can email me at Liza, Liza, .lin, Lin, at WSJ.com. And you can look for me on Twitter as well. My handle is at Liz_in_Shanghai.
And we'll put that in the show notes for easy access. And if you want to get in touch with either Matt or I, you can find our contact information in the show notes as well.